My throat felt like it was filling with cement. One minute I was standing in the kitchen of the lakeside manor, listening to my sister Natalie complain about the caterers. And the next, I was on the floor. I clawed at my neck. My vision swimming. Walnut. The cookie I'd just eaten from the tray on the counter must have had walnut oil. I knew the feeling instantly, the tightening chest, the metallic taste, the terror. My bag was on the sofa, just 10 feet away. My EpiPen was inside. I tried to crawl toward it, gasping for air. But my limbs felt heavy, useless. Natalie turned from the window, her phone in hand. She saw me. She saw my face turning red, my hand reaching out. She didn't scream. She didn't run to help. She walked over to the sofa, picked up my bag, and kicked it underneath the heavy oak frame. Then she reached for the landline on the wall, the only reliable connection out here in the mountains, and yanked the cord until it snapped. She looked at our mother, Lisa, who was standing by the fireplace, frozen in horror. "Don't let her ruin this with her drama." "Mom," Natalie said, her voice cold and annoyed. "She's faking it. She just wants to stop the signing." My mother didn't move. She didn't speak. She just watched as my world went black, terrified of her daughter's rage more than she was of my death. And in that last second of consciousness, I realized something worse than dying. I realized I was being murdered by my own family's indifference. My name is Rebecca. I am 28 years old. A diligent paralegal who has spent her entire life reading the fine print and fixing other people's mistakes. But lying on that cold floor, I realized I had missed the most important warning sign of all. I wasn't a member of this family. I was just the help. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's standing with me in this community. To understand why my sister unplugged that phone, you have to understand the architecture of our family. For 28 years, I wasn't just a sibling. I was the load-bearing wall that kept their perfect lives from collapsing. While Natalie was building her personal brand as a lifestyle influencer, curating an online image of effortless luxury, I was the one ensuring the checks didn't bounce and the lights stayed on. The weeks leading up to my father's death were the clearest example of this dynamic. Dad had end-stage heart failure. It wasn't a peaceful movie death. It was messy, painful, and terrifying. I took a leave of absence from my paralegal job to move into the lake house. I was the one managing the morphine drips at 3 in the morning. I was the one changing the soiled sheets because my mother claimed she just couldn't bear to see him like that. I was the one arguing with insurance companies and tracking every dose of medication in a spreadsheet. Natalie visited exactly 4 times. Each visit lasted less than 45 minutes. She would breeze in wearing designer loungewear, sit by Dad's bed for the perfect lighting, and hold his hand just long enough to snap a photo for her 500,000 followers, and caption it, "Heartbroken but holding on." Then she would leave, claiming she had a brand partnership meeting or a mental health day, leaving me to clean up the reality she refused to touch. My mother, Lisa, praised her for it. "Natalie is so sensitive," she would whisper to me while I scrubbed the floors. "She feels things so deeply. Rebecca, she can't handle the stress like you can. You're so strong. You're our rock." For years, I wore that word rock like a badge of honor. But looking back, I realize it wasn't a compliment. It was a job description. I paid the property taxes on the lake house for 3 years because Dad's pension couldn't cover the rising assessment, and Natalie needed the venue for her summer content. I covered the insurance premiums. I paid for the caterers for Mom's birthday. I spent thousands of dollars trying to buy my way into their inner circle. People often ask why I stayed. Why does anyone stay in a dynamic where they are used up and thrown aside? I call it the invisible chain of the survivor. It isn't weakness. It is a calculated, desperate hope. You convince yourself that affection is a transaction. You believe that if you just solve one more crisis, if you absorb one more blow, if you make yourself indispensable enough, they will finally have to love you. You think you are earning interest in an emotional bank account. But you don't realize the account was closed years ago. You aren't building a relationship. You are building a prison. Brick by sacrificial brick. And you are handing them the key every single morning. I stayed because I thought my sacrifice was a down payment on their love. But as I lay on that floor, watching my mother stare at me with empty, terrified eyes, I realized the truth. I wasn't their family. I was their staff. And you don't save the staff when it inconveniences the star. You just hire a replacement. My father died on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the grief had already been replaced by logistics. The family gathered at the lake house. Not to mourn, but to secure their positions. The air in the manor was thick, suffocating, smelling of stale coffee and expensive lilies. Natalie had arrived with an entourage, her boyfriend, her assistant, and a videographer she claimed was there to document the legacy. She spent the morning wandering through the rooms, pointing out furniture she wanted to keep and walls she planned to knock down. This place is going to be perfect for the summer launch, she told her assistant, ignoring the fact that Dad's ashes were sitting in an urn on the mantel just 3 feet away. We can do the rebranding shoot on the dock. I need to make sure the lighting is right. I sat at the dining table, surrounded by piles of funeral arrangements and legal documents. My mother, Lisa, fluttered around the kitchen, rearranging trays of food that nobody was eating. She looked exhausted, her eyes darting nervously toward Natalie every time her voice raised an octave. This dynamic is what psychologists call the trap of normalized cruelty. It centers on the enabler in this case. My mother. To the outside world, Lisa looked like a victim, a grieving widow trying to keep the peace. But inside the house, she was the gatekeeper. She had learned long ago that Natalie's happiness was the only metric that mattered. If Natalie was pleased, the house was safe. If Natalie was upset, the emotional shrapnel would hit everyone. So, to keep the predator fed, Lisa served up the only available prey: me. My comfort, my dignity. My needs were the currency she used to buy quiet afternoons. She wasn't protecting the family. She was protecting herself from the discomfort of confrontation. Rebecca, Natalie called out from the living room, her tone sharp. Where is the deed? I want to see the property lines. I have a contractor coming tomorrow to look at the boathouse. We aren't discussing the deed until the will is read, I said, not looking up from my laptop. And you aren't remodeling anything. Dad hasn't even been buried yet. Don't be difficult, Natalie snapped. It's my inheritance. I have a right to prepare. She turned to Mom. Tell her. Mom, tell her to stop hoarding the paperwork. Lisa froze, a tray of cookies in her hands. She looked at me, pleading with her eyes to just give in, to just make it easier. Becky, maybe just let her see the file. It won't hurt. Will it? Just to calm things down? I didn't answer. I just stood up and walked into the kitchen. I needed water. I needed air. I saw the tray of cookies on the counter, artisanal. Expensive. Brought by the caterers. I picked one up, taking a bite without thinking. Just needing something to settle my stomach. It tasted sweet. Rich. And then, a second later, I tasted the walnut. My throat didn't just itch, it seized. The panic was instantaneous. I dropped the cookie. I turned to the living room, wheezing, my hands flying to my neck. Natalie was standing by the window. She saw me. She saw the recognition in my eyes. She saw me reach for my bag on the sofa. And in that split second, she made a choice. She didn't move to help. She moved to ensure I couldn't help myself. The darkness wasn't absolute. It flickered. I remember hearing a sound, not the thud of my own heartbeat, but the sound of shattering glass. It was distant, distorted, like underwater echoes. Then came the rush of air. Mrs. Higgins didn't just walk into the room. She burst in. She had been on the back porch clearing the breakfast service, and she had seen everything through the French doors. She saw Natalie pull the cord. She saw my mother stand paralyzed, and Mrs. Higgins, who had worked for my father for 20 years, who had seen me grow up in the shadow of my sister. I made a decision my own mother couldn't. She dropped the tray she was holding. The crash was the sound I heard. She didn't ask permission. She didn't hesitate. She ran past Natalie, who was shouting, "Get out, you hold help. This is a private family matter, Mrs." Higgins ignored her. She didn't stop. She ran straight through the kitchen, out the side door, and sprinted to the guest cottage where the landline was on a separate circuit. She dialed 911 while running back to me with an EpiPen from the emergency kit, kept in the pantry, a kit I had stocked months ago. The jab in my thigh felt like being stabbed with ice. The rush of adrenaline was violent, tearing me back from the edge. I gasped, sucking in air that burned my lungs. The paramedics arrived 7 minutes later. They swarmed the room, professional and urgent. I was fading in and out, but I heard the conversation clearly. "She's in anaphylactic shock," a medic shouted. "Where is her EpiPen? Does she have one?" "We couldn't find it," Natalie lied, her voice trembling with fake panic. "She must have left it at home. We didn't know what to do." It was under the couch. The ER doctor told me hours later when I woke up in the ICU. He was a stern man with graying temples, holding a plastic bag containing my EpiPen. One of the EMTs found it kicked all the way to the wall, and the phone line in the main house was ripped out of the jack. He looked at me, his expression grave. "This wasn't an accident. Rebecca, you didn't just have a reaction. Someone tried to make sure you didn't survive it." I lay there in the hospital bed, the machines beeping a steady rhythm, and felt a strange, cold calm wash over me. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the crushing weight of betrayal I expected. Instead, I felt clarity. The hope I had been nurturing for 28 years, the hope that they would eventually love me, died on that floor. And, in its place, something harder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous was born. I discharged myself the next morning against medical advice. I didn't go back to the lake house. I took an Uber to the city, walked into the office of the most aggressive probate attorney in the state, and hired him on a contingency basis. Then I sent a single text to my mother and sister: "Do not contact me. See you at the reading." 2 weeks passed. I didn't return to the lake house. I didn't answer the 47 hysterical texts from my mother, accusing me of ruining the funeral weekend and making everything about myself. I blocked Natalie on every platform. Instead, I turned my small city apartment into a war room. I met with Mr. Sterling, my father's private attorney, in a glass-walled office downtown. He was a man who spoke in whispers that were more terrifying than screams. He slid a small, encrypted USB drive across the mahogany table. "Your father wasn't asleep those last months, Rebecca," Sterling said, his eyes sharp. He was watching. I plugged the drive into my laptop. The files were time-stamped. Audio logs, keylogger reports, and video feeds. The digital eye, Sterling called it. Dad had installed a high-end internal security system 6 months ago, ostensibly to monitor the night nurses. But the cameras covered the living room, the kitchen, and the hallways. He knew, I asked, my voice barely audible. He suspected. Sterling corrected. He knew money was leaking. He knew Natalie was pushing for power of attorney. He wanted proof. I spent the next 3 nights watching the footage. I watched Natalie scrolling through Dad's banking apps on his iPad while he slept. I watched her arguing with her boyfriend about investment capital that was actually my father's retirement fund. And I watched the footage from the day of the incident. Seeing it in high definition, the deliberate yank of the cord, the kick of the bag removed the last shred of doubt. This wasn't negligence. It was malice. I handed the drive back to Sterling. What do? We wait for the reading, he said. We let them think they've won. And then we bury them. I prepared for the official will reading like it was a military operation. I hired a forensic accountant to trace the digital transfers. I arranged for 2 plainclothes officers to be stationed outside the lake house. Briefed on potential fraud and domestic disturbance. I bought a new dress, black, sharp, expensive, armor. On the morning of the reading, I drove to the lake house. The gate was open. Natalie's Porsche was already in the driveway. I walked in, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor, where I had almost died. The air was still thick with the smell of expensive candles. A desperate attempt to cover the rot beneath the surface. My mother was sitting on the sofa, wringing her hands. Natalie was pouring champagne. Finally, Natalie said, not looking up, "We thought you were going to drag this out forever." "I'm here," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. "Let's get this over with." I sat at the far end of the table, refusing to look at my mother or the spot where I had once gasped for air. I focused only on the empty chair where I imagined my father sitting, watching the final act unfold. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat and brought the TV to life. "Your father updated his will 3 days before he passed," he said. He was very specific. Natalie rolled her eyes, until Sterling read that the lakeside property, the main home, and all investment accounts were left to me, Rebecca. Her champagne slipped from her hand. "That's impossible," she whispered. Sterling continued, showing a spreadsheet of 23 unauthorized transfers, $85,000. 000 funneled to a Cayman Islands shell company listing Natalie as the beneficiary. Natalie exploded, calling it a setup. But Sterling's voice darkened. "Your father knew. He let the transfers continue. He wanted the total to qualify for a felony." Then Sterling played the video. We watched the footage of the day I collapsed the cookie. My choking, my panic, and then Natalie kicking my bag out of reach, ripping the phone cord from the wall, telling my mother to let her pass out because I was doing this for attention. My mother, frozen in the video, had done nothing. When the screen went black, deputies entered. "Natalie Vance," she begged. I grabbed my hand, insisting she didn't mean it. I let her hand fall. "It wasn't a prank," I said quietly. "It was attempted manslaughter." She was arrested. My mother tried to stop me, sobbing that I was destroying the family. But the truth was simple. We aren't family. You're just people I used to know. Natalie was indicted. My mother, cut off and disgraced, moved into a small rental. I sold the lake house and used the money to create the David Vance Legal Defense Fund for victims of financial abuse. Now I live alone in a small, sunlit apartment. Mrs. Higgins no longer an employee, but my family sits with me on the balcony. It took me years to learn that blood isn't loyalty. Walking away from them wasn't cruelty, it was survival. You cannot heal in the place that broke you. If you're listening to this and still carrying the weight of toxic family obligations, let this be your permission to let go. You deserve safety. You deserve peace. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away.